Okay. Well, I'm sure that more people will be joining as we get going here, but I think that we will get started because we have a lot of information to cover and we want to leave time for Q&A at the end as well. So welcome again to the MDA Farm to School Grantee Kickoff webinar. We're really excited to connect with all of you as grantees. My name is Erin McKee. I am the Community Food Systems Program Director at the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy, which is a nonprofit, and we're doing some support work for you as grantees, and I'm so glad to be here with you. We would love to see who is in the room as well. And I hope that you all have the ability to introduce yourselves in the chat. And as long as that works, if you could share your name and your location and your role in Farm to School. Oh, yes, it's working. And then I'm also going to do a poll just to get more of a sense of the background of our group of attendees today. So this poll, it hopefully is open on your screens now, and it's asking, what is your role related to Farm to School? Are you a food service director, a cook, a Farm to School coordinator? Maybe you work in administrative staff or finance at a school, or maybe you're a teacher or farmer, community partner, or other. And then what part of the state are you from? And we're also curious if you've ever gotten a Farm to School grant from MDA before. And then there is a separate specific question asking if you got one last year, just because there's some considerations around those of you who received last cycle's grant. So we just want to kind of have a sense of how many of you there are. So if you'd please fill out the survey. And meanwhile, I'll just share a little bit of housekeeping. So we will, you can ask questions of the presenters at any time. And if you look on your Zoom, I think we're all pretty used to Zoom by now. One thing that's a little different on a webinar is there's a Q&A function beyond just the chat. So if you have a question, an official question for the presenters, if you put them in the Q&A rather than the chat, it'll be a little bit easier to monitor those. And we will have some time for Q&A at the end, but if it's something timely, we'll try to maybe get to those as we're presenting as well. Otherwise, you can also chat and share information or comments, and it might be a little noisier in the chat than it is in the Q&A. So that's why we use the Q&A. We will be covering an introduction to the MDA Farm to School grant today, and then background on basically the reporting schedule, what you all will need to do as grantees, the timeline, and interesting information for you to know about how to make sure that you're keeping current with the grant. And then we also will cover a little bit about what products are eligible for reimbursement under this grant, what local foods you can get, and how to code those, and some information about procurement and processes you can use, and how to find local farms. And then we'll touch on what support there will be for you. We know that there are a lot of first-time grantees, and we're so excited about that, and we want to make sure we're giving you some support. So we'll highlight resources and opportunities for support that we have coming up. And then I'll tell you a little bit about the work we're doing just to ask you all for feedback about the grant and how we might improve it before we go into Q&A. So please do use that Q&A as we go. I'm going to end the poll here so we can see the results about who we have on the line today. I will share with all of you. Oh, good. Okay, we have a really good mix. Looks like a lot of food service directors, and we have some administrative and finance staff. That's really great to see. And then some support people too. That's awesome. And a good mix from around the state, and a good mix of first-time awardees and previous recipients. This is great. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And we do want to highlight that this This webinar is part of a series of support opportunities that we have coming from the Farm to School leadership team. And we have a few partners on the line today to present to you. If we go to the next slide, you can kind of see the team of supporters who are here for you, ready to support you as you are on this grantee journey. Of course, we have MDA. They're doing the actual administration of the funding, a very important role, and a lot of other support as well. And then I'm from IATP. I'm here to support you, do some TA, technical assistance, and then also evaluation. Sammy's here from the Department of Education, so she can really give the expertise about the child nutrition programs. We also have partners from Extension that are helping with the economic impact evaluation, so we can really see how this grant is working for communities. And then Cargill has provided support for the administration since they had such a big pool of funding this year. They needed some extra help to make sure that we can all be here for you. So with that, I will pass it over to Kate from MDA to give some background on the grant.
Great, thanks, Erin. And before I move forward, are we recording? Oh, we are. Okay, great. Wonderful. Just want to make sure so that everyone can watch this later.
That's a really good point. Yeah, we are recording. You don't need to be furiously writing everything down, and we'll share out the link to the recording afterwards too.
Great. Well, hi everyone. I'm Kate Siebold, and I work for the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. Here today with Erin and Sammy, and then my colleague Emily, who also works at MDA. And we're really excited to have all of you as part of this next cohort of Farm to School grantees. And as you may remember from applying for this grant, the purpose of this grant is to increase the amount of Minnesota grown and raised foods used in school nutrition programs and expand market opportunities for small businesses and socially disadvantaged farmers in our state. And this grant cycle, which we refer to as fiscal year 2023, which you're going to hear throughout this webinar, it's an exciting grant cycle for us because we received support from the USDA's Local Food for Schools Cooperative Agreement Program. And this means that we had 4 times the funding this year to award to schools to do local purchasing. And so we had over $4 million, and this funding has been awarded to all of you to purchase unprocessed and minimally processed Minnesota grown and raised foods. And then some of you also received funding to purchase kitchen equipment that will help you buy, prepare, and serve more local foods. So we're really thrilled to have so many grantees this year. And there's many similarities in this grant cycle compared to past grants. But you're also going to hear today about some specific aspects to this grant cycle that are a little unique compared to previous ones. And so we'll walk you through all of that, but know that we're also here to answer all of your questions along the way. So with that, I'll pass it over to Emily.
Thanks, Kate. Hello, everybody. My name is Emily Mayer. I work with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, and I manage the Farm to School grant. So you may have already received emails from me. You will throughout this entire grant process. So it's nice to be here and chat with you all. So as Kate mentioned, we had 4 times the funding available this year to award food grants and equipment grants to schools throughout the state. So we had almost $3.5 million, and we were able to award 60 first bite grants and 56 full tray grants throughout the state. As you can see on the map, the yellow dots are all first bite grantees, and the red orange dots are full tray grantees. So it's nice that we have sort of a smattering from across the area. The full tray equipment grants, so of those schools who received first bite and full tray, 45 of those schools received equipment grants as well to purchase kitchen equipment to help them with their farm to school initiative. Next slide. So I'm going to do kind of a high level of both grants. The webinar today will focus mainly on the food purchasing side of the grant, but there is also that equipment grant that pertains to some of you. But so food contracts, the grant start date, we have some contracts that are routing, some have been fully executed at this point. So once your contract is fully signed by all parties, you can begin purchasing your food for this grant. A little bit different this year, the timeline is very condensed for purchasing food. So all food purchases need to be completed by February 21st, 2024. That's a hard deadline that's due to the source of the funding coming from the USDA. And then we have a final report for food contracts that is due on April 8th of 2024. So that pertains to first bite and full tray grant contracts. Then we have the equipment contracts, which the source of that funding comes from the state. So there's a little bit more flexibility with how and when those funds are spent. So those grant contracts, we haven't started sending those out yet. So they'll be coming in spring of 2023. So similar to the food contract, once the contract has been signed by everybody, then you can start making your equipment purchases. The end date for all equipment contracts is August 31st, 2025. You can certainly finish your purchases well before then, but you do have that option to use those funds until 2025. And then a final report will be due on the equipment contracts within 30 days of the end date of your contract or when you complete your purchases. So the final reporting for both food and equipment is very different, which will go into the food reporting requirements in a little more detail later on. But yeah, so equipment grants, just a reminder for those of you who received equipment, there is a one-to-one match requirement. So that means that the state will pay 50% of the expense that you submit for your equipment. The reimbursement documents, you can submit them at any point throughout your contract. If you want to, you might have to put a down payment down on your equipment and you want to submit that for reimbursement at that time, you can. You can submit it at the end of the school year, kind of however it works best on your end to submit your reimbursement. It's important to note that the equipment reimbursement worksheet is different than the food reimbursement worksheet. It's not a part of the quarterly reporting and the food documentation that Kate will cover. So just keep in mind that there's two separate forms to fill out for these two grants. If you look at the bottom of the screen, it's just a little snapshot of what the equipment reimbursement worksheet looks like. Next slide. All right, so eligible food for fiscal year 23, so this current round of grants, like in years past, food must be grown or raised in Minnesota. So if you live on a bordering community, just be aware that items that are purchased in Minnesota are eligible for reimbursement. If they're grown or raised outside of the state, they are not. Also this year, food must be unprocessed or minimally processed. In the past, that's been a preference, but this year that is a requirement for this funding. So similar to years past, eligible food items are fruits and vegetables, meat, fish, and poultry, dairy products, excluding fluid milk, eggs, beans and legumes, maple syrup, honey, wild rice, that sort of thing. So not eligible would be fluid milk, processed products such as hot dogs, pre-made smoothies, granola. That is different than in years past, so it's important to remember that. As I mentioned, items that are not grown in Minnesota, items that are grown in a school garden or as a part of the summer food program are not eligible for reimbursement. And then any sort of meal or snack that's outside of the National School Lunch Program or the School Breakfast Program. And if you look in the green circle on the slide, just a reminder, file this away. Eligible food items from fiscal year 22 are different than what is eligible in fiscal year 23. So just because you purchased it with a previous grant, it does not mean that it's eligible for this year. So just please reach out with questions. We're always happy to help and clear things up. All right, so this table here is incorporated into your contract. We are also going to be sending it out once your contract is signed by all parties, and you get to see it here as well. So it's just a quick little check that you can use as a resource as you're figuring out your meal plans, what's eligible and what's not. So as you see, hot dogs, bread, fluid milk, not eligible, but cream cheese, buttermilk, cheese curds, tofu made with Minnesota soybeans. Those are items that would be considered eligible. And we are happy to answer questions about that. So please reach out. And then just a reminder, eligible food uses and programs for this round of funding. So it is items that are used as a part of the school breakfast program and the National School Lunch Program. So foods that are purchased for summer food service programs, family or community events, fresh fruit and veggie programs, or just classroom education, farm to school activities that you're doing. Those items would not be eligible. It has to be served as a component of the National School Lunch Program or school breakfast. And with that, I will pass it to Kate. Thank you.
Definitely. So we know that not all of you have fiscal year 2022 grants. So these would have been grants that were awarded in the last grant cycle. But for those of you who do, we just want to spend a couple more minutes providing a little bit of clarification on how to manage your fiscal year 2022 grant alongside this new fiscal year 2023 grant. So first, we strongly encourage you to submit all expenses for reimbursement that you've made to date. So if you have any outstanding purchases that you have not submitted for reimbursement yet, please do so using your fiscal year 2022 reimbursement worksheet. The reimbursement worksheet that you're going to be receiving for your new grant looks different. So make sure you use your fiscal year 2022 version. And if you need that again, just let us know and we can send it to you. But this is just a good way to start this next grant, kind of tying up any loose ends with your previous grant. Then once you're kind of up to date on reimbursement, you kind of have two options that you can choose. So the first option would be to just pause your older fiscal year 2022 grant. This new grant, fiscal year 2023 grant, is going to go through February 21st of 2024. And so you can just focus on your newer grant that has a shorter condensed timeline. And then when that's done, you can resume your fiscal year 2022 grant on February 22nd, 2024. And as Emily mentioned, that grant is longer, so it doesn't expire until January 31st of 2025. Option two is to continue both grants. And if you want to go this route, please just reach out to Emily or myself, just so that we're aware and can make sure that we're on the same page of what you're planning to do with the two grants. But so if you go this route, what you can do is you can focus on your new grant for all of the local foods you're purchasing that are eligible for reimbursement through the new fiscal year 2023 grant. And then for any products that you purchase that are not eligible foods this year, but are in the previous grant cycle, you can apply those to your fiscal year 2022 grant. And if you do that, then you will need to be submitting separate reimbursement requests using your fiscal year 2022 reimbursement worksheet and then your fiscal year 2023 reimbursement worksheet. So to give an example, hot dogs are not eligible in this new fiscal year 2023 grant. So let's say you're purchasing Ferndale hot dogs or Thousand Hill hot dogs. If you would like to continue purchasing those and seeking reimbursement and you have remaining funding in your fiscal year 2022 grant, you can continue to do that and seek reimbursement through that grant. And you would just put it on the fiscal year 2022 reimbursement worksheet, and we'll draw down from that grant and other purchases like produce or uncooked sausage or other meats that are eligible in this grant, you would put on your fiscal year 2023 reimbursement worksheet. So hot dogs is one example. Other things would include like bread that's 80% produced and processed in Minnesota, things like Johnny Pops, ham, sliced deli meat. Those don't qualify because they're pre-cooked, and so but it would qualify under the older grant. So if you have any questions about this, please reach out to us. We know it's a little confusing. We just want you to know kind of what your options are as you're juggling these two different grants. But the real point that we want to emphasize is that this new grant, your fiscal year 2023 grant, is very condensed into just 1 year, and there is not the ability to extend it afterwards. So we want you to be able to focus on that grant, knowing that your fiscal year 2022 grant is longer. So this is just a look at your reporting schedule for fiscal year 2023 grant. So this new grant cycle. So you can see here that we are requiring quarterly reports to be submitted. This is a change from previous grants when you could just kind of submit your reimbursement requests as you wanted. We are now requiring that you submit a report every quarter. So you can submit your grant reports and the accompanying documentation to Emily, who's on the call today, and then our colleague, Anne. So those are their email addresses. Save them. You might already have them from award letters and such, but this is the schedule that we'll be asking for those quarterly reports. And I'll just stress that it is important to get those reports in on time, because these grants are being funded by federal dollars that MDA received. And for every quarterly report you submit to us, we have to turn around in a very short window of time and submit a quarterly report to the USDA. And so that information that you're submitting to us is really important for us to be able to submit our state's quarterly reports as well. And this timeline is also in your grant contract, I believe. So we're just going to share a little bit about what you're going to be asked to report on in those quarterly reports. So you'll have a farm to school reimbursement worksheet. It'll be an Excel spreadsheet, and you will be listing all of the local food purchases that you made in that quarter, and you're going to list them by farm. And on that spreadsheet, which I'll show you in a minute, you're going to list the farm name, the distributor, if you purchased it through a distributor. So that would be, for example, if you purchased a local product through Bix or Upper Lakes Food, or you purchased through a food hub like the Good Acre or Sprout, you would want to list that under the distributor column. And then where the farm is located, city and county, the total amount that you spent with that farm, and the date of purchase. And then there's going to be 2 demographic questions to answer, and we're going to get into this a little bit later, but you'll have to answer if the farm identifies as a small business, and if the farm's majority ownership, which is 50% or more, if the farm's majority ownership identifies as socially disadvantaged. And these 2 questions get back to one of the priorities for the federal funding that we received, being really focused on supporting historically underserved farmers. And so this will be a way for us to track and evaluate who are the farmers that are receiving these grant funds through schools. So this is a look at what that spreadsheet looks like that you'll be using. And in addition to sharing data with us for our reporting, it's also how you will get reimbursed for your food purchases. So when you submit that quarterly report, you're going to send in the spreadsheet, and this at the bottom is an example of what you'll be filling out. So you would list the farm name, a distributor if you worked through one, where it's located, date of purchase, total dollar amount, and then we're going to need a proof of purchase and proof of payment. And so proof of purchase would be invoices or receipts that show that you purchased, what you're saying you purchased, and you can just indicate on the spreadsheet what that proof of purchase is. So for instance, the invoice number, and then proof of payment is could be canceled checks, bank statement, credit card statements. And so you'll indicate what your proof of payment is as well. And then you'll send in that spreadsheet along with the accompanying documentation. So the actual proof of purchase and proof of payment. And again, these will be submitted to Emily and Anne. And as a reminder, all purchases must be complete by February 21st, 2024. So as we get closer to the end of your grant cycle, we're going to be making sure that there aren't any food purchases that you're submitting for reimbursement that are after that date, because it's a hard stop. And so one other thing I'll note is just because on the reimbursement worksheet that we're asking you to list by farm, if you are working with, let's say, a food hub and they are sourcing, 3 different types of vegetables for you, and they all come from a different farm, you're going to have to list it out by those individual farms, not by your total purchase from the food hub. So we would suggest that you kind of communicate that up front with any food hub or distributor that you're working with, so that they're aware of what reporting requirements you need to follow. So you need to be able to trace it back to the individual farms. And so if you're also sourcing a product, let's say beef, that's coming to you through a distributor, and it's actually coming from 2 different farm sources, you're going to have to be able to list out those 2 different farm sources that again have to be in Minnesota. And then the other part of the quarterly report that will be on the same spreadsheet, it just didn't all fit on the last screen, is again those 2 questions regarding farm identity, and if they identify as a small business, and if they identify as a socially disadvantaged farm. So a little bit more information on demographic data. As I mentioned, the federal funds that we received from the USDA to support this year's grants really seek to strengthen food systems for schools by expanding local and regional markets with an emphasis on purchasing from historically underserved producers and processors. And so projects this year were prioritized that where if schools are planning to work with historically underserved farms. And, in addition to being connected to USDA's goal for the local Food for Schools program, this also aligns really well with the MDA's efforts to provide more support for emerging farmers in our state as well. So we, in advance, want to say thank you for helping to collect this demographic data, because it's a really important way for us to be able to learn about and evaluate what farmers are engaged in farm to school work, and how these grant opportunities can support historically underserved farms. So you will be required to answer those 2 demographic questions for every farm that you list on your quarterly reimbursement worksheets. And as I mentioned, that data will be used for program evaluation and reporting, including the local Food for Schools reports that MDA is required to submit to the USDA on a quarterly basis. So we do have instructions for how to collect that demographic information. And I will say that we also have a document that we've put together that kind of outlines all of this information around demographic reporting, along with the instructions that I'm going to be sharing today. And so that will be one of the resources that you receive after this webinar. So to collect accurate demographic information, the MDA has prepared a template letter and questionnaire for you to ask farms to self-identify as socially disadvantaged and a small business. So please do not make any assumptions about any farmer's identity or business. Instead, we have this questionnaire with 2 questions saying, do you identify as a small business, and does majority ownership of your farm identify as socially disadvantaged? And that questionnaire provides the definitions of both of those terms. If you're purchasing local food through a distributor or a food hub, you'll need to work with that organization to request that these questions be answered by each of the individual farms. And then once you get that response back from the questionnaire, compile, save your responses so that you can just easily copy and paste their answers into your quarterly report. And so you are required to answer these questions on your quarterly reporting, but it is optional for producers to respond to the demographic questions that you send them. If a farmer prefers not to answer, they can select decline to answer on that questionnaire, and then on your quarterly reporting, when it asks, for instance, does the farm identify as a small business, you will have an option to select yes, no, or declined to answer. And you would select decline to answer if the farm declined to answer. So again, we have a document that explains all of this, and along with the questionnaire to provide to farmers, there's a letter that explains why MDA is asking schools to collect this information and report it. The information that we send to the USDA will be aggregated, so it won't be individual farmers' names. It will just be the total number of the aggregate data, the total number of small businesses and socially disadvantaged farms that this funding has reached. However, it's important to note, and this is explained in the instructions, that any data that is collected through this is subject to public data requests by law. So again, just something for farmers to be aware of as they're reading this. And again, it's outlined in the instructions that we'll provide you to send to farmers. Another exciting piece that we're excited for is site visits. So we are required to do site visits for any food or equipment contract over $25,000. And these site visits will be an MDA representative, perhaps a representative from MDE or IATP as well. And we're looking to do those as early as this spring or in the fall or winter of next year. And we would love to be able to schedule your site visit. If you have a special meal that you're planning, so if you're doing any Minnesota Thursdays or something special for Farm to School Month, or you're having a farmer visit, we'd love to do the site visit then and get to experience the great Farm to School work you're doing and give you kudos for that. So please let us know if you have any dates coming up on the calendar, and we'd love to get those scheduled with you for those site visits. And I'll also just say, if you have a food contract under $25,000, but you have a really awesome farm to school event that you're planning, a lunch, for instance, also let us know, because we love to hear when those things are going on. And if we're able to join, we'd love to make it. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sammy, who's going to share some information from MDE's side.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sammy Brigton from MDE, work on the school nutrition programs and Farm to School. We've gotten several questions about this, so you and your business manager likely want to know, if you don't already, the codes for tracking in UFARs. And so these are the codes to use. Be careful, because there are both funds for food and equipment. The funds to support food purchases are coming from USDA, which are federal, and the funds to support the equipment are coming from the state. So you'll see the codes there. We can also, I forget if they're included in like a one-pager, we can share them in a document somewhere too, if you are scribbling them down right now. And then the XXX code is your own school's local code to use in code. We also just want to briefly remind you about the procurement standards. I've seen some questions coming in about that actually too. So it's a hot topic, and we'll just briefly cover it today, but we'll share with you that we have more webinars coming up, and we can dive into more of the specifics in each one of those as well. But by all means, if you have particular questions, that's what we're here for too. Feel free to reach out. I know lots of questions already in the chat related to this. So just as a reminder, these are the procurement standards. And These, along with regulatory requirements or guidelines that schools, like all of you, must follow to remain in compliance with federal procurement regulations. And because your schools are using taxpayer dollars, both on the federal and state side, there are controls that are put in place to make sure those dollars are used efficiently and effectively. These procurement standards shape the processes and procedures that all of you follow when you purchase foods, even local foods. And so the first one is that Buy American provision. And of course, buying locally meets that, and Minnesota grown meets that. So we don't have to spend much time on that. But all procurements must still support that full and open competition, ensuring that all competitors are on a level playing field. So they all receive the same information based on like what you want to buy. And you actually can't limit the competition by just specifying local. You can't like verbally say that or put it in a written document, but there are still ways that you are able to target local growers and local foods other ways within these standards. And then, oops, one more, sorry. Your school must actually only award procurements or purchases of local foods to what we call responsive and responsible vendors or farmers. And so responsive means the vendor, farmer, producer responds to a request in a way that meets all the elements of your request. So for example, if your school is asking for a farm food safety plan or information and the farmer provides a copy by the deadline that you requested it, the farm would be considered responsive. And then on the other side, responsible means that either the vendor, farmer, producer met all the elements of the request. So for example, if your school requires that all eggs be candled or graded and the producer is able to meet that request, then they would be responsible. All right, you can move on to the process. So regardless of which procurement method you use, because there are a few different kinds, you will need to walk through essentially this process or this type of procurement process that you see here for all purchases. Planning. So taking a look at your menu, defining what local means. And as a reminder, like Emily and Kate have already said, it has to be Minnesota grown for this specific funding. What are your school's farm to school goals? Like based on what you submitted in your initial grant proposal, what did you originally include in your grant work plan? You might have to revisit that and then update it as necessary. You might even have to pull together a small team at your school to begin planning the purchases of your procurement. Drafting specifications. Once you do the planning and know what you like to buy, you need to draft those specifications of the food. So Kate, if you just go ahead one more slide, we'll probably have to come back to this in a second too, sorry. But this is when you actually document what you'd like to buy. So this is how you determine if a producer or vendor is responsive and responsible. Remember back to those procurement standards. So how much do you need? How often do you need it? What size, shape, and quantity do you need? So think through all the ways that you could and would be using it on your menu. How do you want to receive it? Does it need to be washed? How should it be packed? Do you want it frozen? When do you need it? And how much flexibility do you have when you need it? And like this lady's little quote says, you don't have to have all these answers yet, but answer and like write down as much as you can. So Kate, if you go to the next slide, this is just an example, a few different examples of what a product specification looks like. One is written out, and then one is more visual. Especially if you're working with farmers that may speak other languages, some of these visual pictures are helpful as well. And so again, this should be a written documentation of what you want for each food that you'd like to procure. All right, can we go back a couple more again? Sorry. So just finishing out this sort of procurement process, the one in the middle behind the heart says collecting quotes or advertising the procurement. So depending on the method that you use, this is where you would share your product specifications that you just wrote and what you want to buy with all potential farmers, growers, or producers in your area. And so you can target local foods without specifying local by just calling up the farmers that you know could provide these foods that you specified. Same would be, I saw a question, like if you are looking for just to supply from emerging farmers or socially disadvantaged farmers, you could just only call those farmers, and that way you know that you could that you'll be buying from them. And this means that, again, you could call them, you could email, just reach out to the local growers in your area and provide the information that you want and what you want to buy. And this does involve a little bit of research on your end to really know what producers are in your area or within your range of local and within the state of Minnesota. And then the next one there in the process is awarding the contract, or that sounds really official. So maybe it's just making the award or making the purchase. After you've collected those quotes from potential producers, you evaluate which are most, again, responsive and responsible. So what of those farmers that you called could meet what you wrote in your specification? And then you select the one with the best price of those that could meet all your specifications. And then the final one is managing the contract or purchase. And that sounds official too. But it's basically just monitoring what you agreed upon in that written specification and communicating with your producers when your expectations aren't met, because sometimes they might not be, but just communicate that to them and follow up with them and say, hey, I was expecting this. It is Minnesota, so especially with produce, you do have to embed some flexibility into this as well. And so communication is really key, and allowing your producers to adjust to your needs and expectations too. And then, yes, those procurement standards are at the heart of this whole process. And then I forgot to say, the first three steps is really where you'll be doing that research on finding and connecting with those local farms, food hubs, or other businesses. All right, we can skip to the method. So this again is could be a whole 8-hour day of going into each of these different procurement methods and how it relates to local foods. And this actually comes from USDA's Procuring Local Foods for Child Nutrition Programs. It's just a great overview, which that document also, it's probably like a 200-page document. It also includes really well-written product specifications in there, some of which are Minnesota examples. There's also examples of RFPs in there, or bid specs for even not just produce, but meat items too. So we can share the link to that, but also I know many of you are asking for example RFPs or product specs, whatever it may be, we can share those out. But I'll just draw your attention to the top. Those are the different procurement methods that could be used to buy local foods. The micro purchase is under $10,000, and that one you could make the purchase right away, but you do have to distribute the procurements equitably. So if you have 5 apple growers in your area, you do have to buy from all 5. So if you have one that's your favorite, you can't just really stick with it. You got to spread the wealth. So a small purchase threshold is a little bit different, in that it's basically writing down again what you want and then calling. So you can see, I'll draw your attention to how to get bids. You advertise or solicit quotes by phone, email, or just reaching out. And then you can just, of course, only approach those local sources that you could potentially want to buy from. And then the last two there are the more formal procurement methods, which do involve either IFB, and that's usually just a sole source. So like one food item. I haven't seen it really in Minnesota yet, but there are schools around the country that use one for like beef And then the RFP, there are schools in Minnesota that do a request for proposal, and you can do a request. I know there are federal limits with the dollar amount. So any procurement over 175,000 for public schools is required to be an RFP or request for proposal. And a lot of times farm to school purchases are not going to reach that threshold a lot of times. Some school districts maybe, but you can do a RFP, or we were trying to come up with a less official term earlier, I don't know, a request for quotes, or just a list, like even if it's under that dollar amount. So say, you're going to be spending $50,000 on local foods this school year and next, and you just want to create a list or a document of all the foods that you want to buy and how much and how you want it, like all those product specs, and just combine it in one document, one list, and you can send it out to potential farmers in your area. That certainly would be a great way to solicit producers in your area. So I know I really summarized that very quickly, but if you have any questions, I know there's probably some in the chat, but feel free to reach out to us individually too.
Thanks, Amy. So now we just want to spend a little bit of time talking about how to source all the local food you're going to be buying. And I know many of you have some great plans in place, but just as kind of a refresher, as we think about this grant and farm to school sourcing in general, just a reminder that there's different ways that you can buy your local food. So you can purchase local food directly from a farm, or you can purchase food through kind of a middle entity. So that could be a food hub or an aggregator. Some examples of food hubs in our state is Sprout, which is in Little Falls, the Goodacre and Falcon Heights. And then the farmers market hubs. There are several farmers market hubs all across the state that aggregate product from farmers market vendors, and they have an online ordering platform. And so that's a growing one. So if you didn't know that there was one in your area, maybe you have one now. And so check that out as well. Then there's also distributors. So, you may be able to be buying local products through the distributors you're already working with, like Upper Lakes Food or Bix or IFD. So if you are planning to work through a distributor, I think it's important to connect with them up front to remind them about the requirements for your food to be from Minnesota and to be able to be identified back to that original farm source. We also will be hosting a webinar in March for distributors, producers, and food hubs to learn a little bit more about what schools are being asked in terms of reporting and what's eligible and that, so that they can be informed. And so we'll certainly be sharing that out, and you can also encourage the farms or food hubs or distributors that you work with to attend that webinar as well. So if you're planning to work directly with farmers, these are just a few suggestions of where to start. So the Minnesota Grown Wholesale Directory is a great place to kind of start. You can go online to the Minnesota Grown website. Up in the top right corner is where you find the wholesale directory. And that's listings of farms that are interested in working with wholesale customers, such as schools. So you maybe use the Minnesota Grown Directory yourself personally to find like a U-Pick apple orchard or something. That is much more kind of consumer focused. So make sure that you go to the wholesale directory side. And then once you're there, you can search by items. So you could type in carrots. And as you see here on the example, you can like zoom into the map based on where you are, and it'll pull up farms that sell carrots in your area. And so then you can click on a farm profile. From there, there's contact information, there's information about their farm. So if there's something that you're interested in buying that you don't have a source for yet, this is one way to find a few farms near you to reach out to and ask if they would have any product available. You can also, I should mention, like you can search by item, but you can also search by area just to see what farms are in your area and then reach out to them to say like, hey, we've got a grant to buy these local items, like, you know, what might you have available? And they may be able to just let you know that way as well. You can also go, Minnesota Farmers Market Association has a listing of, you know, or a function to find a market near you. And so go to the farmers market and start connecting with some farms there. Not a lot of farmers markets are open, you know, in February, but they will be opening this spring. You can also just find what farms sell at a farmers market and reach out to them now. Winter is a great time to be connecting with farmers. So I encourage you to do some of that initial outreach as soon as possible. And then there also are some ways to find farms on social media. I know that some schools have used Farm Direct, which is a Facebook page where you can just like post for things you're looking for, or post as a farm if there's things you're selling. So maybe check that out in case there's a farm in your area that might be a good fit for you to work with. And then in general, I would just say ask around and start trying to build those connections. So, you know, reach out to other schools in your area or restaurants, or maybe a local grocery store that you know does some local sourcing. Ask what farms they're working with. You can also connect with your county-based extension educators or your local public health SHIP coordinators, the local farm service agency office. All these folks are potentially well connected with farms in your area. So that's another resource to reach out to as you're looking for farms. I would say in general that it really is just about kind of starting to build those relationships and investing in building connections with farms in your area. And so it takes a little time, but it's really worth it to then have fantastic farm partners. And you may find in reaching out to new folks or, you know, connecting with other schools in your area that there are farms that you didn't know existed that would be a fantastic fit for you to work with. And one thing, just going back to kind of in connection with the demographic data, is one of the hopes of this program is that schools are reaching out and building new connections with new farms and emerging farms in our state. But again, it really is about building those connections. And so we know that can take time. And we also know that you may have connections with farms that are already existing, that are fantastic partnerships, and that farm maybe isn't a small business or a socially disadvantaged farmer. It is not a requirement that every farm you list on your reimbursement worksheet be considered a small business or a socially disadvantaged farm. But just keep that in mind, that we encourage you to seek out building those new connections, as well as perhaps continuing to work with existing farm partnerships that you have. And certainly if you have questions as you're reaching out to farms, we are here as resources as well and are happy to help connect you as we can. Shifting gears, once you have your local food purchased, we encourage you to also be promoting it so that students and staff and families in your district know about the great local food that you're serving. So the Minnesota Grown program does have free promotional materials that schools can order. So these are just a few samples. The local foods brought to you by poster is big and laminated, and you can write, you know, and like dry erase markers on it to write in the farm name. Local food be buzzin' is just a great pun. It looks fun, so it could be a great addition to your cafeteria. And then we also have like laminated clings and other like signs to put on your serving line. So if you go to the Minnesota Grown site and then you go to like members and retailers, there's a button to click for ordering marketing materials. And that's how you can order those free marketing materials. Another great resource for getting free marketing materials is Minnesota Harvest of the Month. So if you haven't heard of it, Minnesota Harvest of the Month is the state's new like farm to school marketing and education program. And there are 15 Harvest of the Month foods that the materials feature. There isn't a set calendar that you have to follow. You can kind of choose which Harvest of the Month foods you want to feature when. although we do have a suggested calendar if you want to have that structure provided. But Harvest of the Month provides free posters, clings, stickers that say like, I tried, Minnesota apples today, huge hit with kids. We also have printed recipe cards, all kinds of free materials. So if you go to the Minnesota Harvest of the Month webpage, you can order all of those. We'll mail them to you, and you can pick them out for each of the different 15 Harvest of the Month foods. The website also has a recipe hub with food service scaled recipes. So maybe you're interested in finding some new recipes to use your local peppers that you're going to be buying. You can go to that and go to the pepper page and find several different recipes that feature peppers already scaled for food service. And then there's, of course, education materials too that you can be sharing out with your district. So standards-based lesson plans and activities. And then we also have monthly Harvest of the Month meetings and trainings where you can hear best tips and tricks, best strategies, and hear what other schools are doing and kind of build out your community around farm to school work. So we encourage you to go to the site and check it out. If you're using any of the materials, we encourage you to take the Harvest of the Month pledge. It's just a way for us to know that schools are using this. It's not, any sort of intimidating pledge. It's just that, that you're using these materials and that you're doing farm to school work. And it's a great way for you to get recognition for the great work that you're doing. So I encourage you to check out the Harvest of the Month website too. And then I think, Erin, I'm passing it back to you.
Yeah, so Kate has been sharing some resources that are available for kind of lifting up your program, marketing your program. We wanted to highlight other support that is in place for you all. And one thing we're getting tons of questions in the Q&A, and it's really great. We're trying to answer some of them just through typing, and then we're going to have time at the end to get to them as well. But there are some kind of technical questions that I think some resources can help you with too. So one thing that I wanted to share is that we've done some really detailed Farm to School 101 webinars on hot topics that I think would be really helpful for, especially for those of you who are new to Farm to School, but actually, we can all learn new things, I think. So one of them was about planning your menus around local foods. And you can hear from some of our expert panel today, as well as some schools themselves who have shared their strategies for how to get those local foods incorporated into their cycle menus, what items to purchase, where to find recipes, that kind of thing. And that was just a really good overview of all of that planning and integration and the strategy of it. Like you can start with just one item that's maybe a little bit easier. Apples are very popular for a good reason. Usually, you don't have to do a lot of processing. We have a lot of good growers in the state. So you can start with something that's easier, and then it has a kind of model for how you can slowly build up and add more things, because starting small is always a good idea. The other webinar that I think would be really helpful is getting into the details of how to find the farmers to purchase your local food items for. So we went over really briefly some guidelines and initial places you can look, but I know that can be really overwhelming. This webinar, I think they're each an hour long. This webinar will go into more detail about, okay, how do I find a farmer? Can you remind me of what that procurement process looks like? What kind of the bids look like? All of that stuff that can be a little bit difficult to gather yourself. And again, we have experts sharing and then schools too. So I think that those would be really helpful for you to check out just for the actual technical information on how do you get started with Farm to School. In addition to those previously recorded webinars, we have been planning for a series of webinars specifically tailored to this situation where we know we have such a great big group of grantees and what might be helpful to you. So those are kind of Farm to School 101 webinars, and we thought we could get in even greater detail with some very specific topics. So one thing that we are planning to offer is a webinar that's really geared towards those of you who are first bite grantees. And it could also apply to full tray grantees if you're new to Farm to School, or if you just feel like, hey, I'd love a little refresher on the basics. We're going to go over really good basic 101 information there, but we'll also get into building your own plan for purchasing and trying to kind of give you one-on-one technical assistance there. I think we'll be doing a little bit of work in that meeting where it'll be kind of more informal and you'll have a chance to ask questions, and we'll maybe even do some small groups as well. So we really strongly encourage those of you who are new grantees to attend, and it is just 2 weeks away. So it'll be on February 23rd at 2:30 again, 2:30 to 4. And then we have a couple other topics that they're open to anyone to attend. So one will be on purchasing local produce, one will be on purchasing local meat, and then we'll have one on local foods around the tray. So it might be things like grains or sweeteners or local cheese or dairy products, not fluid milk, but dairy products. So we'll kind of look at other items that you can buy beyond the fruits and vegetables and local meats. And then on March 29th, we're planning a webinar that's specifically towards farms, food hubs, and distribution companies to kind of fill that audience in on what's going on with all of these grantees and encourage them on how they might work with schools, what type of information they need to know about what it's like to sell to schools. And so we want to make sure that all of you know about this. We will be sending out a follow-up email. And I know a lot of you have been asking about templates and resources and things. So when we do a follow-up email after this webinar, we'll include a link to this webinar, the recording of this webinar, as well as links to the resources that we've mentioned, and then templates and things like that that have been mentioned. We will also send out kind of save the date email that will have the links to each of these. So they will be separate. You can choose which ones feel relevant to you and register just for those. I will say we would love to see the new grantees attend that First Bite webinar, but they are optional. They're really meant to be useful for you. And one of them, well, I won't even get into that right now, but I do want to share, I have a little survey for all of you where I would love to get input that we can use as we're planning what content to include in these webinars. So I'm going to put a link in the chat for webinar input. And basically, that's also optional, but if you want to tell us, like, these are my burning questions about buying local produce, these are the things that I really want you to cover about, you know, how farms can work with schools. So please feel free to fill that out, and we will take that into consideration as we're planning the agendas and the presenters for these upcoming webinars. And then if we go to the next slide, I also wanted to highlight, in addition to these webinars where we have, similar to today, formal presentations around certain topics planned, we have an informal way for you to come and ask questions. So you can come and literally wherever you're at, we will be there to answer. The second Wednesday of every month, we have an open office hour from 2:30 to 3:30, where members of the Farm to School leadership team and also the Farm to School or Farm to Early Care Network as well, if anyone is on the line from the early care world, you can come with your questions, you can talk through some issues, you can hear from other peers about how they've solved things. So let's say you have local celeriac that you're going to buy, but you really haven't seen any recipes for it. You can ask us, and maybe other people on the line can share We usually have a pretty good group of attendees, and I feel like the peer-to-peer connection is just as powerful as asking all of us questions too. But you can register for that one time, and then it's just monthly. And if you want to attend, you can attend. It's not required, but you can come to, once you've registered one time, you can come to any of the future ones. And one of our webinars, just due to scheduling constraints, is going to take the place of the March office hour, but otherwise we've been doing them every month. I think it's been 2 years now, and they've been very popular and really, really a great way to connect with all of you and provide a place to go when you have questions. I'll also say we are planning to do a mailing to all of you as well that can share a contact list for those of us who are on the support team for grantees, a flyer that will share the information about the webinars and office hours, information about the promo materials. And then I think we had a plan. I know some people have been asking about the eligible foods. We wanted to include a little one-pager that would outline which foods are eligible and not, and then the basic, places that you can find technical information about your grant. So keep an eye out in your mailboxes for a physical mailing that will be coming. I'm hoping to get that all to you, hopefully next week, and if not next week, at least in the early part of the following week. And then I did want to share too, one thing that I am so excited about is we have been getting feedback from grantees over the last year and a half or 2 years. And we are, because this is a new grant program for MDA, we wanted to do evaluation and just see, like, how is it working? Is it doing what we hoped it would do? And what is the economic impact for communities and farmers? And so we are completing some evaluation activities, which just means that you'll probably hear from me sometime or my partners at U of M Extension, Ryan Pesch and Bridget Tuck. We might do some surveys or some focus groups or interviews to try to get feedback from you as grantees and also from farmers and community partners, just to gather information about how the grant is working. And we're actually, what you see on the slide there is that we are going to be publishing the first evaluation report on this grant tomorrow. So we'll include a link to that in our follow-up emails as well. But please, this is not required again, but if you do want to give us feedback and share how the grant is going for you, we will package that information into a report like the one that we'll share with you for future planning and kind of looking at, it's a very popular grant program. We want MDA to hear from all of you who are participating in it so that they can think about potential improvements or things that you love and you want to keep exactly the same. And we just want to document that impact, because we also use that information when we share it with decision makers who are deciding, hey, should we give this program more funding, or maybe, what does it mean for communities to have this happening with their neighbor farmers? We want to have some really good information to share with them to make a convincing case that this is a really powerful and necessary program, and hopefully to continue to grow the level of funding that they have as well. And I did choose a couple highlights just from, we did evaluate the fiscal year 2021, which was the first year that they were doing reimbursement of local food purchases, and with this farm to school grant. So I thought some of this information was pretty interesting. You can see how schools have been using the funding and what items they're purchasing. And it's a pretty good mix. And you can see that apples are very popular. I think apples and carrots, really good items to start with. We've been seeing a lot more schools using their reimbursement money to purchase local meats as well. And so that's a kind of recent trend in the last few years, I would say. And then the next one, I think this was really interesting too. So from the farmers side, we did do a survey of farmers, and we did hear, this was a survey specifically of farmers who had schools purchase from them, and those schools were reimbursed through the grant. And there was not any farmer who said that they're not interested in continuing to work with schools. And most of them are interested in increasing the amount that they're selling to schools. And we also can see the impact on not just the way that the economic impact can go into communities through not just the direct purchases, but also indirect purchases that affect a lot of different types of organizations and companies in the communities. So very interesting. I hope you all will take a look at that, and we'll send it out to you tomorrow. So I think that we're just on time to get to the Q&A portion of this webinar, and we have been getting a lot of Q&A, a lot of questions in the Q&A, which is great. So I'm going to jump right in. I've been kind of organizing them in a document here by topic, and I'll just say, like, right away, there were some questions about what the information that we're sharing here and where they can find it, and is there, will there be a spreadsheet for reporting, and will you be able to get this handout? Where can we find this information that you're covering? So can I ask Emily to address where will they be able to find the information that we've been covering today?
Yeah,
on
that's
reporting?
a great question. So once the grant contract has been signed by everybody, so internally there's like 5 signatures from MDA that are needed for your contract, plus your authorized rep. So it takes a little bit of time to get that through the system. So once your contract is fully signed, we will email you a copy of that contract, and then we'll also include the reimbursement and reporting worksheet. We'll include an overview, kind of highlighting some key points of your contract, and it's a lot of the stuff we discussed today. And then also include a 1-pager about eligible and ineligible food items as a reminder. So hopefully once you receive that from us, a lot of those questions will be answered. But if you have questions after you receive those documents, feel free to reach out to us, and we're happy to help you out with that. So.
And Emily, can you confirm, should everyone have received their contracts by now?
Yeah, so we're in the process right now. So some schools have received their contracts, others are sort of floating in the MDA limbo. And then there's some that we're still working on drafting and getting those all put together. So we hope that everybody would have their contract within the next couple of weeks at the very latest. So their food contract.
Great. And kind of related question on contract. So someone was asking, can I purchase equipment right now and be reimbursed? And it is important to have the contract executed and signed by everybody before you make any purchases, correct?
Correct. Yep. So you cannot make purchases until your contract has been fully signed.
Okay, that's a good thing to keep in mind. So then we did have a lot of questions about eligible food items. And so some of that was related to the 2022 and 2023 differences, and then some were just clarifying exactly what could be used. So one of them, Tiffany was asking, can excess food grown at their local U of M extension be eligible? And then a related question was, someone else asked, you said no school gardens. Can we purchase food from our high school FFA program because it's not our garden? What would you say to those questions?
Yeah, so the intent of the grant is to be building relationships with local farmers. So items that are grown by your school or within your school district would not be eligible for reimbursement. And as far as the U of M extension, Kate, do you have thoughts on that? That's a little bit of a gray area.
It is, and I think we've gotten a similar question once before, and I think we decided no.
Mm-hmm.
For similar reasons to what Emily just shared, of kind of the intent of the grant being to support Minnesota farmers and producers, to focus efforts on building relationships with those farms, as opposed to extension or other places that are growing great food but are in a little bit of a different position.
Yeah, I see there was one other question similar. If a greenhouse that's part of a school district is raising products for sale and another school district purchases that product, is that eligible for reimbursement? Would you say for some of these questions that are very like specific and could fall into a gray area, is that something that you would suggest that they maybe check in on ahead of time?
Yeah, absolutely. If you have any questions about like, is this an eligible item or not? Like, it's always better to reach out to me or Kate. Even Erin or Sammy could help you out as well. So just send us an email and give us a phone call. We'll walk you through it. We'll figure it out together.
Great. And then a very popular question was asking if there was a template for farm to school bids. And we have been answering that kind of via chat, and a lot of people were hoping that we could send that to them. Sammy said that yes, there are some examples that we can share, and we will include that in the follow-up email. So no need to individually request it. We will definitely include that to everybody. Sammy, there were some questions about the coding, and you would know better than I, like whether they're revenue codes or expense codes, and then there was also that difference between state and federal funding.
Yeah, I just double checked. I mean, they came from our I got them from our finance department too. And then I double checked on UFARs and the list of codes. And I'm pretty sure those are correct. I will triple check after today, but yeah. And then we can send out a clarifying message if for some reason we were in error. But right now, I think those are it.
Okay. That sounds good. And then kind of related to procurement, there was a question on whether there's a template or paperwork that you need to submit to show why you picked each supplier, or if they just have to have that on file. And then is price the only reason to choose a supplier, or does socially disadvantaged farmers have more weight?
Yeah, so procurements and the documentations associated with it just need to be kept on file, right? Kate and Emily, you don't need those just based on what we talked about earlier. That's, you only track it on the spreadsheet and that's it. Yeah, so from the grant perspective and from our perspective, it's just something you keep on file as proof of the procurement. And then, yeah, you could just call socially disadvantaged farmers to show preference to them, or just reach out to only socially disadvantaged farmers.
Mm-hmm. And you can also use that in your specs, right? You can, or can you can share that you're trying.
That's usually more in a RFP. You have like evaluation criteria.
Okay.
Yeah, so in the actual specifications, you can't like specify things like local, or I don't think you could specify socially disadvantaged. But you could, if you do an RFP, that could be a preference or evaluation criteria in there. But like in the informal case, which most of these procurements will be, and I feel bad because when I start talking about procurement, people start like, oh no. And then it's like, let's not do farm to school, but like it may sound intimidating, but these are like, just you're shopping for what you want to get at your school, the right product from the most responsive and responsible vendor, farmer, producer, and then at the best price. And so most of the procurements I'm thinking will be considered informal. And so you get to choose who you want to call, email, or contact. And so those could all be certain, socially disadvantaged farmers that meet that criteria.
Mm-hmm. Related to the nutrition programs, we did have some questions about just confirming you cannot use this reimbursement funding for the summer food service program. There was disappointment about that since it is our prime growing season, but this is specifically for the National School Lunch Program and Breakfast Program. We also had a couple questions wondering if it could be used for the Child and Adult Care Food Program, which is the nutrition program for the littler kiddos, early care age. And this grant was not for CACFP. This grant, yes. There is some exciting stuff on the horizon that maybe we can get some. It looks like it's in the proposed budget to open this up to early care somewhere in the future, but for 2023, we're sticking with the K-12. It's for National School Lunch Program and Breakfast Program specifically.
One thing I'll add about summer that you could consider, because I know summer is a great time to be buying local food, is the food you're purchasing has to be used in the school breakfast program or National School Lunch Program, but you could purchase food in the summer and freeze it for use in the school year. So if you are able to do any freezing and you have staff in the summer, that is just one option to keep in mind to kind of take advantage of summer harvest. And then you get some great products that you can use in the school year then for those eligible meal programs.
That's a great point. I love that idea. Going to questions about foods that are eligible. There was just a confirmation that you cannot get fluid milk, and similar to kind of what Emily had mentioned before, since the intent of this grant is to increase new purchases from new local Minnesota purchases from local farms. Most of the fluid milk served in schools is already local, and so all of the budget could get eaten up just with milk purchases. So instead, this grant is really directed at supporting new purchases of not fluid milk, but other local items. There also was a question about kind of the processed and unprocessed products. So one person was asking about clarification on brats. So if they are uncooked wild rice brats, is that okay in 2023? And then another person was asking, it specifies you can't buy granola. Does that also mean that they can't make their own granola if they purchase Minnesota produced ingredients?
You can go, Emily, if you want. Okay.
No, you're fine.
So the brat question, brats are potentially eligible if they're uncooked with no fillers, and like salt or minimal seasonings are okay. We did get confirmation from the USDA though that like multi-ingredient brats, so let's say like brat and wild rice or brat and cheese, those are not eligible in this grant cycle. We recognize that it's a little confusing, and so if there's any specific circumstances around brats or food items that you want clarification on, please feel free to reach out. And on the granola piece, you can make your own granola buying oats. It would just be pre-made granola that's already been like roasted or cooked / processed that would make it ineligible. But if you're planning to make your own granola, go for it. That's great.
And there was also some interest in or concerns about local breads and bun items. So for 2023, those are not eligible. Is that correct?
Correct. You could buy local flour and do baking, but anything that's like pre-cooked or pre-baked does not qualify as minimally processed per the USDA's definition. So no bread products for your fiscal year 2023 grant.
Okay. And then we had a couple questions about the kind of demographic data collection that USDA requires. Questions about how will they determine the threshold for small farms, and a little bit of discomfort in reaching out to farmers and asking them if they're considered socially disadvantaged. and if there's a definition of socially disadvantaged that will be used. And is there anything more, will we provide any more support around that? I think there will be some guidance and worksheets that are given.
Yes, so when you get your executed grant contract, one of the other documents that you'll get is a document outlining, kind of explaining again the reason why you're being asked as schools to report this in your grant reporting, and then instructions for how to reach out to farms, and again, a letter and questionnaire to send to the farms. And so in that is the definition that the USDA is using for socially disadvantaged farm and small business. And so you do not have to come up with your own definition. That the questionnaire that we provide is just a 2-question questionnaire that the farm will answer of like, yes, no, or decline to answer, to do you identify as a small business per the following definition, and then we list it out. So we'll provide all of that to you. And the letter that we provide with the questionnaire gives kind of some explanation for the farmer as to why this is why they're being asked, that noting that it's optional. And so hopefully that using that letter and questionnaire helps you as a school district be able to kind of explain like why you're asking this, and explain that it's part of this grant requirement that MDA and the USDA are asking for. Certainly, if you have any questions about that process, please feel free to reach out to us too, and we can talk more. And I would say that, you know, when sending this, I would say take time to build that relationship first with the farmer, you know, get to know them. You don't need to like reach out to a farm for the first time and send this questionnaire. This is really meant to, once you have connected with a farm and you're working together, and it's time to do your reporting, then you can send that questionnaire. So it's not like any sort of it's not meant to be any sort of screening. It's just meant to, like, once you're already working with them, to send it. And again, hopefully that letter that we provide helps explain and provide some explanation to the farm, so it doesn't all fall on you as a school as to why we're asking this. But it's really just meant to be a way to kind of think about how we can support farm to school as a way to support market development and opportunities for emerging farms in our state. And so the data is only being collected to just think about how we can continue to provide support both to schools and farmers, and helping them connect and lift up the value that farm to school can bring to local economies. And so again, we explain a little bit of that in the letter that we'll provide you.
Yeah, thank you. I know that we're coming up on the end of our time here, and I'm looking at the questions to see if there's anything that we haven't touched on. On the CACFP, the Child and Adult Care Food Program question, one person was saying they prepare all the food for CACFP and National School Lunch Program at the same time. And is it okay to get reimbursed for that? I'm assuming that, well, maybe I should let Emily just answer that question, but could they know how many meals are going for the school lunch program? So it would be like a percentage of that, or how would they figure that math out?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think we might have to think about that for a minute, and we can get back to you with an email. I would think that it would probably be okay, but would just want to clarify that before I give an answer. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I also saw one other question where someone was saying that they had thought that some items would be eligible. They were planning on purchasing milk and doing some CACFP meals. And I just want to say that we are here to help you. So I think that we can help you make a plan. If you had a plan in mind and you're seeing that you have to adjust things, we are definitely happy to support you in finding a way to make sure that you use your funding. And we do want to provide a lot of support. So please come to an office hour, ask us your questions. We can help you think about what other items might be available in your area and try to think of some creative solutions for you. Okay, it's good to know a couple of you are looking at that CACFP question. So we can definitely look into that and follow up as well.
Yeah, and Erin, one thing I just want to put in is that I've had a few questions about people's budgets that they sent in with their applications and if they're held to that budget throughout their contract. No, in short, because we understand and recognize that like you submitted your application thinking you'd be able to get apples from farmer so-and-so, but now they don't have the product available anymore. So like there is wiggle room within your budget so long as the foods that you're supplementing in are still Minnesota grown and raised and eligible food items. And if you have questions about that or just want to run something by us before you purchase, certainly send us an email. We can just confirm if it's an eligible switch.
I think that's a really important point to highlight. Well, I know we are at time here. We've covered a lot of ground, and I do just want to remind all of you that we have other webinars coming up where I think we'll get more into the weeds on some of these very specific topics. But otherwise, maybe I'll hand it off to Kate to wrap us up here.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Erin. I think we just wanted to just end by saying, and we've all kind of mentioned this, that we are here to help and answer your questions and offer you support. And so hopefully this has helped put some of our faces to our names, but we just wanted to kind of mention who's here to help. So Emily Mayer is the grant administrator for the Farm to School grants at MDA. Emily's a great person to reach out to around grant contracts, reporting, reimbursement questions. And at MDA is also helping with some of that grant administration since we have such a big group of grantees this year. And so similarly, Anne, you may be hearing from Anne around grant contracts, and you can also reach out to Anne with questions. And then I am also at MDA and a little less involved in the actual grant administration, but am here for any farm to school technical support questions. I can also help to answer questions around like what foods and things are eligible as well. And if I'm not, I'm messaging with Emily and Anne a lot throughout the day. And then finally, just wanted to call out Erin McKee at IATP and Sammy Burrington at MDE, who are also a wealth of knowledge around farm to school technical support and sourcing and you name it for farm to school. So we're all here. And if you attend TA office hours or come to future webinars, you'll see our faces again. And I think with that, just really want to say thank you so much for applying for this grant and for the thought that you've already put into how you'll be using these dollars and the energy you're putting into the work ahead. We really appreciate it. We're really excited to see what you all do with these grants. And we look forward to keeping in touch.